Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. I'd like first to thank Caritas Internationalis with the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See and other organizations. I'm so pleased to see among the organizations the Associazione Comunità Papa Giovanni XXIII. It's a good omen to see this organization here. It's an honor, it's a pleasure to be here with Monsignor Yusuf Thomas, with Andrew Feinstein, and I think that they will complement a lot of what I have to say here. I think that His Excellency the Apostolic Nuncio, my friend Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, has answered the question. But this facilitates immensely my job, because I think that will be in great coincidence of what he has said. But before beginning to share some ideas, I'd like to acknowledge here the presence of my two colleagues at the Commission of Inquiry. Since September 2011, we have the illusion that we'll just stay for 6 months, then we are here for 4 years. But this is wonderful, because we benefit from the wonderful presence of Karen Abu Zaid, a former Coordinator General of UNRWA, and for 10 years, and also many, many years at the High Commission for Human Refugees. It's wonderful to have the experience and the wisdom of Karen in our commission. And my colleague, old colleague, Vichit Mutabor, former Special Rapporteur of the United Nations, one of the mandates on the sales of children, and also former President of the Commission of Inquiry on the Ivory Coast, and many other titles that he has. Then I have learned so much with them, and this is a privilege to spend 4 years together with these two extraordinary friends and colleagues. Carla Del Ponte is another colleague. She was not able to be here today, but she'll be with us on the 21st. I'll try to, now I'll count my 15 minutes, Michael, okay? The war in Syria has entered its 5th year and shows no signs of slowing. It has mutated in a multi-sided and highly fluid war of attrition, where warring parties have repeatedly experienced periods of gains and defeats. This has served only to fuel the illusion, and I will repeat this many times, that a military victory remains possible. Civilians are the main victims of an ever-accelerating cycle of violence, and this precisely is the object of our 10th report. As we have said in the report, there are no longer any safe places in Syria, as evidenced by the mass displacement of civilians out and within the country. Indiscriminate attacks on civilian inhabited areas are committed across Syria by most, if not all, of the warring parties. Everyday decisions, whether to go to visit a neighbor, to send your child to school, to step out to buy bread, have become potentially decisions about life and death. The trauma experienced by civilians who live under indiscriminate fire and who cannot therefore predict when a deadly attack might arrive cannot be underestimated. This is a suffering that knows no gender, ethnicity, or religion. Syria is one of the world's most chaotic and lethal battlefields in the world. With hundreds of armed militias, there are now wars within wars. In conjunction with this development, and a parallel crisis replete with multiple threats and displacements is unfolding before our eyes. And estimated 7.6 million persons are internally displaced in Syria, while there has been an outflow of over 4 million into neighboring countries. These massive movements of people are narrowing the protection space, something that we address very much in our report, and is stretching the generosity of host communities of the neighboring countries of Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon to the limit. The 4 million Syrians who are already refugees, most come from opposition or contested areas that have been systematically bombarded by government aircraft and artillery, making them not habitable. But the majority of the 17 million Syrians is still in the country, live in government-controlled areas now threatened by ISIS. Half of the Syrian population has been displaced inside or outside the country, so accurate figures are hard to estimate. But among those particularly, I think that we have to mention the Alawites, slower, please. Okay. 2.6 million, the Shia, thank you, the Shia heterodox sect that has provided the ruling elite of Syria since the 1960s, the Christians, 2 million, the Syrian Kurds, 2.2 million, the Druze, 650,000, in addition to millions of Sunni Arabs associated with the Syrian government and with its army. Let's not forget that. If those people begin to flee Syria, then the number of 4 million will be the double. We'll have 8 million refugees, for sure, because these people are already in panic, threatened by the so-called Islamic State. The Syrian conflict, and that is the line that I'd like to pursue here, the Syrian conflict, the humanitarian crisis, and now the European refugee crisis are part of the same phenomenon. We cannot understand the conflict, separate these parts of the phenomenon. The brunt of the crisis has principally fallen on Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, as I have said. And when you see the numbers, it's very impressive because these big balloons here are the four, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. And then you have the European countries until now have received less than 10% of the Syrian refugees, or something like 400,000. Happily, there has been some positive news about some countries of that region to receive hundreds of thousands of refugees. In any case, it's rather depressing to see yesterday in a European frontier to see police moving against hundreds of Syrian refugees, beating them with batons, dousing them with water cannons, and spraying them with tear gas as they try to surge through a barbed razor wire fence. This humanitarian crisis has not fallen from heaven. It is a result of the indiscriminate aerial bombardment by the government and shelling by anti-government groups. The crisis is a joint venture of the sponsors of all warring parties, furnishing them armament, financial and political support, and not providing enough support for humanitarian aid. The UN humanitarian agencies, I think that's worthwhile to remember this, are on the verge of bankruptcy and unable to meet the basic needs of millions of Syrians. The Syrian Regional Refugee Response Plan is only funded by 35% of the 1.3 billion needed to support refugees, both in camps and by providing resilience funding for the countries hosting them. It's clear that Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon needs that assistance to help them to cope with 4 million refugees. They have taken it. This year, as we have seen in a mission in the region, the World Food Programme cut rations to 1.6 million refugees. The most vulnerable living in those countries that I mentioned now only have $13 to spend on food each month, a figure that would leave refugees vulnerable to recruitment by extremist groups. The continuing war represents a failure of diplomacy. We have said this last time, a failure of diplomacy. Influential states have acted with equivocation in their efforts to extinguish the conflict in Syria. Their actions display a greater willingness to plan for war than to plan for peace. With money, fighters, and weapons, they have funded the flames and empowered the perpetrators. And we have repeated as a mantra that by doing that, they are aiding and abetting war crimes against the Syrian population. War crimes, gross human rights violations, and crimes against humanity. It is time that member states overcome the ambiguity that consists on affirming the need of a political solution and continuing supporting and arming the warring parties in a military escalation. It is more than time to curb the proliferation and supply of weapons accompanied by the perpetrations of human rights violations and war crimes, as I have mentioned. The Syrian crisis is the worst of our time and has come to the breaking point. This is the price of political and diplomatic failures. This is a quote from someone that understands them, Yaqub el-Hilo, the UN humanitarian head in Syria. The breakdown of the aid system results from the strategic stalemate over Syria. The predicament of the Syrian people is exacerbated by the inadequate response from the international community at the political and humanitarian levels, at a time when urgent and decisive action is needed. As we have always, I'm always quoting ourselves, we have missed many opportunities under the illusion of a military victory. In some years, in some months, people say next time the victor will come. It was an illusion. Or the need to balance the strength of the warring parts so that in the negotiation table the situation is more balanced. And then you know the failure of two wonderful opportunities. The mission of Kofi Annan, who was able to propose the Geneva memorandum that will continues to be the basis for any future negotiation, and also the mission of Lakhdar Brahimi, that both of them left their mandates not in a very good humor. Kofi Annan said this: without serious, purposeful and united international pressure, including from the powers of the region, it is impossible for me or anyone to compel the Syrian government in the first place, and also the opposition, to take the steps necessary to begin a political process. The plight of civilians cries out for immediate action to ensure their protection. The livelihood of Syrian population is subverted daily by the increasingly internationalized nature of this international armed conflict. Now, this conflict cannot be solved by the two warring parties inside, because you have the influential regional member states, and then you have the international powers. And then it will be a really very difficult process. And the violence is endemic, regrettably proliferating in its scope and intent. It's thus unconscionable that the global community, as well as regional and local actors, are prevaricating, that was our language, in their response to a conflagration which has been escalating since 2011. This living tragedy demands an expeditious end to the political procrastination and military escalation, as we have said in the 10th report that you read. And I am almost finishing. A war that systematically kills civilians, silences opponents, displaces ideas, and pits communities against one another requires more than compassion to resolve. There are too much compassion in the world. People are so moved by the suffering in Syria. The Syrian people deserve deserve much more than this ambiguous commitment to return to their country, to peace, and to create conditions amenable to negotiations. This cannot be achieved without setting aside of the narrow national interests of a few and the coming together of a community of power which holds within itself not only the ideals of human rights but also pragmatism that recognize that without peace and justice in Syria, we all will reap the whirlwind. We said this on 23rd June to the Human Rights Council. On September 8th, we are so pleased to listen to the Secretary General say the members of the Security Council must look beyond national interests. We have to look for the global interests. Very much in according to what Archbishop Tomasi said. It is evident that the only way to end the violence in Syria is that countries with influence over the warring parties, in particular the permanent members of the Security Council, work in concert to put pressure on parties to end the violence and to initiate an all-inclusive negotiations for a sustainable political transition process in the country that will be Syrian inclusive. That is, it's not for the world to dictate what will happen in Syria. Finalizing. Last August, the Security Council endorsed a plan by our colleague, the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, to prepare the ground for a political process in Syria. We are really, the four of us, we are really impressed by the great effort of de Mistura, because he was able to meet with hundreds of Syrians, with all the warring parties and the different political and ideological situation. And he has proposed something that is another window of opportunity that we expect that will not be lost, for a dialogue between the conflict parties in 4 thematic working groups: safety and protection for all, political and legal issues, military security and counter-terrorism issues, and continuity of public service and reconstruction and development. Of course, we are not in the political track. Happily, we don't have anything to do with the political negotiation. But I think that is decisive for the influential actors to really support, not this nice word, we support Staffan de Mistura. We need to have objective support for his actions so that he can be successful. I hope that all the influential countries will support the launching of this process before, as in the recent past, this new window of opportunity will be closed, and the hopes for the Syrian people will once more postponed in terms of ceasing their immense suffering. I'll be very happy to answer questions or comments that you may have at the end of this debate. Thank you very much.